The street dog followed the child straight into the mansion. The November chill bit through Ethan's thin jacket as he trudged home from school along Maple Avenue. At 12 years old, he'd mastered the art of becoming invisible, head down, shoulders hunched, footsteps quiet. The sprawling suburbs of Boston's North Shore were filled with grand homes and perfect families, none of which resembled his reality. "Hey, freak!" Tyler's voice echoed from the basketball court across the street. "Where's your mom today? Still too drunk to pick you up?" Laughter erupted from the group of boys, but Ethan just quickened his pace, clutching his backpack tighter. 6 months since they'd moved here, and nothing had changed. As he rounded the corner onto Chestnut Lane, something caught his eye, a flash of movement in the alleyway between the convenience store and laundromat. Ethan paused, squinting into the shadows. A thin, trembling dog emerged, its ribs visible through matted fur. The animal, some kind of shepherd mix, looked up at him with wary amber eyes. "Hey there," Ethan whispered, crouching slowly. The dog flinched but held its ground, nostrils flaring as it caught his scent. "You hungry?" He reached into his backpack, pulling out his untouched sandwich. His mom had been asleep when he left that morning, so he'd made it himself. Peanut butter and jelly, slightly squashed from being in his bag all day. The dog inched forward, hunger overcoming fear. It snatched the sandwich and retreated, devouring it in seconds. "You're on your own too, huh?" Ethan murmured. He extended his hand, palm up. The dog hesitated, then took a step closer, sniffing cautiously. "I won't hurt you." For 15 minutes, Ethan sat cross-legged on the cold pavement, talking softly about school, about Tyler and his friends, about how his mom wasn't really a drunk, just sad all the time since Dad left. The dog gradually edged closer until Ethan could see the small gash on its front leg. "You're hurt," he said. "Come home with me. I'll help you." He stood slowly, and to his surprise, the dog followed, maintaining a careful distance of about 6 feet. "I'll call you Shadow," Ethan decided, watching the dog trail behind him like a reluctant guardian. The walk home took them along Essex Street, where the modest duplexes gave way to increasingly grand homes. Ethan usually hurried through this section, feeling the weight of what he lacked. Today, with Shadow following, he walked a little straighter. As they approached Hawthorne Boulevard, the crown jewel of the neighborhood came into view, Blackwood Estate. The mansion stood behind ornate iron gates, its stone facade and towering chimneys visible through ancient oak trees. Rumors about the place swirled through school, that old man Blackwood was actually dead and his staff were covering it up, that his fortune came from stealing art during World War II, that anyone who stepped foot on the property never came back the same. Ethan had never paid much attention to those stories until Shadow suddenly darted ahead, squeezing through the bars of the gate and disappearing into the grounds. "Shadow, wait!" Ethan called, running to the gate. Through the bars, he could see the dog limping rapidly up the curved driveway. Without thinking, Ethan spotted the small maintenance door beside the main gate, found it unlocked, and slipped inside. The manicured lawn stretched before him, dotted with bare-branched maple trees and stone benches. Shadow was already halfway to the house. Ethan sprinted after him, fallen leaves crunching beneath his sneakers. He was so focused on catching the dog that he didn't notice the old man watching from a second-floor window, phone already in hand. "Excuse me, young man." The voice, firm but not unkind, stopped Ethan in his tracks. He turned to find a tall woman in a grey sweater and dark slacks, standing on the mansion's wide front steps. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her expression was somewhere between curiosity and concern. "May I ask what you're doing on private property?" Ethan's throat went dry. "I'm sorry, Mom. I was just following that dog." He pointed to Shadow, who now sat at the top of the steps, panting. "He's hurt, and I was trying to help him." The woman studied him for a moment. "And you thought he lived here?" "No, Mom. He's a stray. He just ran in here and I followed." She nodded slowly, then looked at the dog. "Well, he certainly needs attention. That leg doesn't look good." She glanced back at Ethan. "I'm Mrs. Reynolds, the housekeeper, and you are?" Ethan Mills." Well, Ethan Mills, since you and your friend have come all this way, perhaps we should tend to that wound. Come inside, but please wipe your feet." Ethan stood frozen in disbelief. Inside? The mansion? Mrs. Reynolds almost smiled. "Unless you'd prefer to treat him out here in the cold." The foyer of Blackwood Estate was larger than Ethan's entire apartment. Marble floors stretched beneath a crystal chandelier, and a sweeping staircase curved up to the second floor. Shadow seemed equally overwhelmed, pressing against Ethan's leg for the first time. "This way." Mrs. Reynolds led them through a hallway, lined with paintings, to a warmly lit kitchen. "Sit," she instructed, pointing to a wooden chair. "You too," she said to Shadow, who surprisingly obeyed, settling beside Ethan's feet. As Mrs. Reynolds gathered first aid supplies, a door swung open, and a girl about Ethan's age entered. She wore a navy blue uniform, some private school, Ethan guessed, and had dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. She stopped abruptly when she saw Ethan. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Eleanor," Mrs. Reynolds interrupted. "This is Ethan. He's helping with an injured dog." Eleanor approached cautiously, her eyes finding Shadow. "Where did he come from?" "He's a stray," Ethan explained. "I found him downtown." Eleanor knelt, examining the dog with surprising gentleness. "The cut isn't deep, but it's infected." She looked up at Mrs. Reynolds. "We should call Dr. Martin." "I was thinking the same," Mrs. Reynolds replied, already reaching for a phone. As they waited, Eleanor kept glancing at Ethan. Finally, she asked, "Do you go to Westfield Middle?" Ethan nodded. "7th grade. I used to go there before—" She trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "Before what?" Eleanor shrugged. "Before grandfather decided public school wasn't suitable anymore." Ethan's eyes widened. "Your grandfather is Mr. Blackwood, the owner of this place?" She nodded, a hint of pride mixing with something like embarrassment. "It's just the two of us now, and the staff." Before Ethan could respond, the kitchen door swung open again. A man entered, leaning heavily on a polished wooden cane. He was tall and thin, with a shock of white hair and piercing blue eyes that immediately locked onto Ethan. "So," he said, his voice surprisingly strong for his apparent age, "you're the trespasser." Mr. Blackwood's stern expression made Ethan's stomach tighten. He stood quickly, nearly knocking over his chair. "I'm sorry, sir, I was just following the dog. Yes, Mrs. Reynolds informed me." The old man moved further into the kitchen, his cane tapping rhythmically against the floor. He studied Shadow with an appraising eye. "And where exactly did you find this animal?" "In an alley off Chestnut Lane," Ethan answered, his voice barely above a whisper. He was hungry and hurt. Mr. Blackwood hummed thoughtfully, then turned his attention to Ethan. "And you live where?" "The Pinewood Apartments, sir, on Cedar Street." Something flickered across the old man's face. Recognition, perhaps, or concern. "That's quite a distance from here. Does your mother know where you are?" The question caught Ethan off guard. "How do you know about my mom?" "This is a small town, young man, despite its proximity to Boston. Word travels." Mr. Blackwood lowered himself carefully into a chair. "Eleanor, please fetch my phone from the study." Eleanor hurried out, leaving an uncomfortable silence in her wake. Shadow, sensing the tension, pressed closer to Ethan's leg. "The dog seems to have taken a liking to you," Mr. Blackwood observed. "I gave him food," Ethan replied simply. "Ah, yes, the quickest way to earn loyalty." The old man's tone was impossible to read. "And what were you planning to do with him after treating his wound?" Ethan hadn't thought that far ahead. I was hoping to keep him, but my mum—" He trailed off, knowing how unlikely that scenario was. Their apartment barely had room for the two of them, and pets weren't allowed. Mr. Blackwood nodded as if Ethan had confirmed something. The doorbell rang, and moments later, Mrs. Reynolds returned with a middle-aged woman carrying a medical bag. "This is our visitor, Dr. Martin," Mrs. Reynolds explained, gesturing to Shadow. As the veterinarian examined the dog, Eleanor returned with the phone. Mr. Blackwood took it and dialed, his eyes still fixed on Ethan. "Hello? Is this Caroline Mills?" "This is Edward Blackwood." "Yes, that Blackwood. Your son Ethan is at my home." He followed an injured dog onto my property. No, he's not in any trouble. In fact, I was rather impressed by his compassion. Yes, we've called a vet. Of course, take your time. We'll see you soon. He hung up and addressed Ethan's surprised expression. Your mother sounded worried. She's coming to collect you after her shift ends at the hospital. You know my mom works at the hospital? I make it my business to know about the people in this town, especially those who work at institutions I support financially. He turned to the vet. What's your assessment, doctor? Dr. Martin looked up from bandaging Shadow's leg. Minor infection, easily treated with antibiotics. He's undernourished, but otherwise healthy. No microchip, though. And if no owner comes forward? Mr. Blackwood inquired. Standard procedure would be the shelter after a holding period. Ethan's heart sank. He'd heard stories about the local shelter. Too many animals, not enough adoptions. Mr. Blackwood seemed to read his thoughts. Perhaps we might consider an alternative arrangement. The estate could use a good dog. Eleanor's eyes widened. Really, grandfather? You mean it? On one condition, the old man said, fixing Ethan with an intense gaze. Young Mr. Mills here would need to visit regularly to help care for him. The responsibility should fall to the one who found him. 2 hours later, Ethan sat beside his mother in their small kitchen, trying to process everything that had happened. After his mom arrived at Blackwood Estate, Mr. Blackwood had invited her for tea in his study, a conversation Ethan wasn't privy to. When they emerged, his mother looked stunned, but not upset. So, she said now, cradling a mug of coffee between her palms, you made quite an impression today. Ethan shrugged, still uncertain whether he was in trouble. I just wanted to help Shadow. Caroline Mills smiled faintly. And now you've somehow landed a job at the most prestigious address in town. It's not really a job, Ethan protested. Mr. Blackwood just said I could come by after school to take care of Shadow. With compensation, Ethan, that's a job. She took a sip of coffee. Did you know Edward Blackwood is the chairman of the hospital board? My boss's boss's boss, essentially. Ethan shook his head. The enormity of his accidental trespassing was still sinking in. He said something else interesting, his mother continued, studying him carefully. He mentioned that his granddaughter Eleanor has been struggling to adjust since her parents' accident last year. Apparently she hasn't made any friends at her new school. She seemed nice, Ethan offered, a little quiet. He thinks you might be a good influence. His mother's expression was thoughtful. It's strange. We've been here 6 months, and this is the first time I've seen you excited about anything. Duh. The next afternoon, Ethan found himself back at the iron gates, this time pressing the intercom button. Mrs. Reynolds' voice crackled through the speaker, and the small side door unlocked with a click. Shadow was waiting on the front steps, his bandaged leg held slightly aloft, but his tail wagging furiously. Behind him stood Eleanor, looking more casual in jeans and a sweater than she had in her school uniform. He knew you were coming, she said by way of greeting. He's been watching the gate for an hour. Ethan knelt to greet the dog, who covered his face with enthusiastic licks. Hey, buddy. Feeling better? Grandfather set up everything in the carriage house, Eleanor explained, leading the way around the side of the mansion. He said that would be your domain. The converted carriage house was a warm, rustic building with windows overlooking the garden. Inside, an area had been set up with dog beds, toys and feeding stations. A desk in the corner held notebooks and care instructions. This is all for Shadow? Ethan asked incredulously. Eleanor nodded. Grandfather doesn't do anything halfway. He's already had the staff order everything a dog could need. She hesitated, then added, he also said you could use this space for homework, if you wanted. Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Ethan would come to Blackwood Estate after school, sometimes staying until dinner. Shadow's leg healed quickly, and soon he was racing through the grounds, leading Ethan and Eleanor on explorations of the vast property. The old gardener, Mr. Finch, taught them about the historic trees and rare plants. Mrs. Reynolds showed Ethan how to prepare Shadow's special diet in the kitchen, and sometimes Mr. Blackwood would join them, walking slowly with his cane, telling stories about the estate's history or asking thoughtful questions about Ethan's day. One evening in December, as snow fell softly outside the carriage house windows, Ethan looked up from his math homework to find Eleanor watching him. "What?" he asked. "Nothing, it's just—" She smiled. "Shadow was right to bring you here." Across the room, the dog lifted his head at the sound of his name, then settled back into his plush bed. "I think," Eleanor continued, "he knew exactly what he was doing that day. Dogs are smarter than we give them credit for." Ethan thought about the unlikely chain of events. A stray dog, an unlocked gate, a second chance for everyone involved. Maybe it wasn't magic or fate, just the ordinary miracle of finding connection in a world where loneliness so often prevailed. Outside, the lights of Blackwood Estate glowed warmly against the winter darkness, no longer mysterious or forbidding, but a beacon of unexpected friendship. And tomorrow he would return, following the path that Shadow had somehow known they all needed to take. As winter turned to spring, the once empty halls of Blackwood Estate echoed with laughter. Shadow, now healthy and strong, had become the heart of an unlikely family, formed through chance and compassion. Ethan's mother found new purpose working closely with the hospital foundation that Mr. Blackwood chaired, while Ethan and Eleanor became inseparable friends, their initial awkwardness replaced by the easy understanding of kindred spirits. The mansion that had once been the subject of whispered rumors throughout town gradually opened its doors, hosting community gatherings in its gardens and welcoming visitors who inevitably fell in love with the friendly shepherd mix that greeted them at the gate. Mr. Blackwood, who had lived in isolation since the tragedy that took his son and daughter-in-law, found renewed purpose in mentoring Ethan and watching Eleanor bloom once again. Sometimes the most profound connections begin with the simplest acts of kindness: a shared sandwich, an open door, the decision to follow when something calls to your heart. And sometimes the wisest guide on that journey might just be a street dog who somehow knew exactly where he needed to lead a lonely child. What did you think of "The street dog followed the child straight into the mansion"? Did Shadow's journey into Ethan's life resonate with you? Have you ever experienced an unexpected friendship that changed everything? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want more like it, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Your support helps me continue creating these meaningful narratives that remind us how ordinary moments can lead to extraordinary connections. Don't forget to share your own stories of unexpected friendships in the comments. I read every single one and draw inspiration from your experiences for future videos. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin when we choose to follow our hearts, just like Ethan followed Shadow.